Good evening, everybody. Oh, that's rather loud. Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. I'm so pleased that everyone could join us, either in person or online. For those of you who are in the room, there's about twice as many, 3 times as many online. But I'm really glad that those in the room have managed to make it here to join us today. And of course, we welcome everyone online too. So today's event is a hybrid event. And it's really fantastic to see the power of hybrid events because they double, treble, quadruple the number of people who are able to benefit from our events and join us around the world this evening. So this is a really special event marking World Refugee Day. And I'll introduce myself and then I'll explain why I'm so super excited. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Professor Jane Falkingham. And I hold a number of titles at the university. I probably have the most titles of anyone, outrank the Vice-Chancellor in terms of numbers of titles. I'm the Vice President, Engagement and International here at the university, but I'm also a Professor of Demography and Social Policy, and I'm also the Director of the Economic and Social Research Council Centre for Population Change. And I also hold for the university the civic agenda. So I'm the owner of the civic strategic plan and the university's ED&I plan. And if you think about where refugees sit, they actually sit at the confluence of all of my different roles. So as an academic, as a professor of demography, I've been doing research on migration and population movements for about 30 years. As the owner of the civic plan, I'm championing our University of Sanctuary. And of course, as the owner of the ED&I strategy, it's fundamental that we offer opportunities to all in terms of inclusion. So today's event couldn't be closer to my heart in all of the different roles I hold. And tonight's event has been truly collaborative across several teams across the university. The Race, Ethnicity and Cultural Heritage, or REACH network, its ambition is to be champions of our minoritized community, promoting equity and celebrating diversity. And they've been supported by our colleagues who've been working for us to become a University of Sanctuary. Thank you, Professor Owen, who's been championing this for more years than I can remember, along with colleagues from our Office of Alumni Relations. And so we're presenting an evening where we're hearing from 3 really exciting speakers who'll share their experiences of displacement and resettlement and of the legal and policy frameworks that shape their lives, and also, importantly, the role that education has played in that. Before I go on to introduce our speakers, I do have a bit of housekeeping. There are no fire alarms planned, so if the alarm does go off, we'll be guided out of the building and to the emergency muster point. But we have 3 exciting speakers, 2 of whom are here tonight, and Hewan Omer, who will be joining us remotely from Iraq, and she is online now listening to this. She'll appear magically on the screen later on. And then after we've heard from them, we'll move into the Q&A section. And for those of you joining us online, don't worry, we will be watching out for your questions. Please use the Q&A box that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Start with your name, and if selected, your question will then be asked on your behalf, and we'll make sure that we give equal balance to those in the room and those online. If you're in the room, we've got some microphones, so you'll need to raise your hand rather than your virtual hand, raise your physical hand, and we'll come and ask your question, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So I'm really delighted that we have 3 speakers, Dr. Homira May Rezai, Dr. Chelvan, and Dr. Hewan Omer, who I think is also a doctor. Actually, everyone's doctors, I think. We should just be calling everybody doctors. And it's my real pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Homira May Rezai. May is the Chief Operating Officer of Merzima Therapeutics, an innovative pharmaceutical company developing diagnostics and therapeutics for pregnancy complications, which as a professor of demography, that's another topic close to my heart. And she holds a PhD in medical research. She is also Hazara from Afghanistan, who arrived in the UK at age 13 in 2006. And she currently serves as chairwoman of the Hazara Committee in the UK, which is a not-for-profit organisation working for the protection of Hazaras around the world. So, May, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here, and such an important week to think about the refugees and the experiences and the problems that intersect and shape our lives. But before I start, I don't want to say a talk, but this conversation we're going to have, can I ask all the women in this room to raise your hand if you have gone to school or finished school? That is all women in this room. But can you imagine our government tomorrow changes that and says that as a woman, you're not allowed to go to work, get education, go to the park, or travel, or go shopping, and would not allow your daughters to attend the school? That is the experience I had growing up in Afghanistan as a child, and that is the experience of millions of women in Afghanistan today. During the 90s, the first Taliban regime, when they came to Afghanistan, took over, I was a kid. At that time, I couldn't go and get education because of my gender. I was being persecuted because of my ethnicity. I was being hunted down because of my religious affiliation. Unfortunately, the same thing is happening today. And so what that led us is to move everything that we knew, our homes, our land, our friends, our family, and to take this very difficult decision and to move to the UK, where a land I had not known the language or I didn't have a single friend. But we knew that staying in Afghanistan would have a dark future, and to get persecuted and get killed for another reasons. So when I came to the UK, I was 13 years old, and I couldn't speak a word of English, hadn't gone to school or get a proper education. But I was determined to make something out of my life and use the opportunity that the UK had provided. And so I tried really hard, even with very little English or no English that I knew, but I remember carrying this huge dictionary because I knew how to read and write Farsi. So when someone was trying to communicate with me, I had a notebook with me, and I would tell them, can you write it in English? And I would find the words in Farsi, and that's how I would start to learn how to communicate. But it was actually a very good idea. So if you guys ever want to go to another country, I mean, we have Google Translate now, so it's probably much easier now than it was back then. But I finished school, and I took the sort of conventional route to education, went to university. After that, I did my master's, went to do my PhD, and then I got involved with the company May Therapeutics, where we're developing diagnostics and therapeutics for pregnancy complication, and my focus is preeclampsia. And the reason I want to tell this story is because, one, I want everyone to think that being a refugee, although now it's just become a number, it's lives. It is people that are fleeing persecution. It is people that are forced to leave everything that they've known, to make that very hard decision and to move to another country. But more importantly is individuals that can genuinely make a difference in the host communities. I now consider myself, and I am a British citizen. And my colleague and I, on our way here, were having this conversation, and I said, well, if I wasn't in this UK, if I wasn't in this country, and if I didn't work on preeclampsia, there wouldn't have been a drug to be developing for preeclampsia, right? That wouldn't have happened. And this is the work of a refugee that are right now is being, the image that refugees right now have is, in my opinion, is absolutely disgusting. But when we look at the individuals and the refugees that have had such an important impact in our society, we then started to then sort of humanize these refugees, think about them as humans. But I also want to go back and tell you a little bit as to why I was forcibly displaced and my family had to make that hard decision. As Jen said earlier, I'm a Hazara from Afghanistan. Hazaras are an ethnic group native to the land that we now call Afghanistan. But they have over a century-long history of persecution, genocide, enslavement. I mean, between 1891 to 1893, 62% of the Hazaras were massacred and the rest were enslaved. So this is the sort of community that I'm from and the experiences that we've had. And so when the Taliban regime came over, we knew what was happening because they were a sort of duplicate of what we had experienced in the 1890s. And one of the campaigns and the work that I've been working on since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban is trying to raise awareness about the ongoing genocide against the Hazaras in Afghanistan. And for those of you who are working on doing research, whether it's in the fields of politics, in the law, or it's demography, is to think a little bit about some of these persecuted communities like the Hazaras in Afghanistan. Because again, I want to do another exercise. If you could put your hands up if you've heard of the people called the Hazaras. That's actually surprisingly really good. This is not the number that I usually get. It's 1 or 2 people in a room, but this is fantastic. And that is something that at the charity that I chair is something that we're trying to do, is to raise awareness about the people, to raise awareness about their situation. I was personally involved with this inquiry, a group of British parliamentarians that gathered together, and this was again as a result of campaigns that the Hazaras in Britain did, and we conducted an inquiry into the situation of the Hazaras. And the British parliamentarians' assessments were that the Hazaras are at risk of genocide at the hands of Taliban and ISK. So we know what is happening in Afghanistan is the atrocities that's been committed in Afghanistan is there. But unfortunately, with the failure of the foreign policies of the international community, have left the Hazaras completely, have abandoned them, and they are there with no protection whatsoever. And the Hazara women in particular are one of the most vulnerable communities in the world, because not only are they being wiped out from the society, lack of education, access to healthcare, but experiencing genocide, experiencing mass killing, experiencing forced displacement have particularly affected the Hazara communities. And what we truly need is more research, more data, concrete data to understand the situation more. And so collectively, we'll be able to analyze and be able to propose solutions for the international community. And one of the things that my colleague here might be able to talk a little bit more, or knows more, is that genocide is often recognized way past that has happened. When we look at Armenian genocide, when we look at many other atrocities against the communities, it's often recognized when it's way too late. And so doing research on communities like the Hazaras would be able to inform the international community that this is happening. And they cannot say in like 10, 20 years when it has already happened, so half the Hazara population wiped out, is that they didn't know that it was happening. So the power of education, the power of data, the power of research is something that can actually save people from things like genocide. So, and when I got invited to come and give this talk, I was really excited for various reasons. One, to be able to negate this notion that refugees are criminals. We're not. And 2, to raise awareness about the persecution of the Hazaras in Afghanistan, which is the main reason I was forcibly displaced from my own hometown, to separate from my own family, and to really make everyone really think about the impact education has. A lot of us, it's because it's something that we have to go to school, and it's sort of a conventional thing that we then go to university and complete that we often don't appreciate the impact that it has on individuals and societies. And for me personally, when I think about that millions of girls in Afghanistan are deprived of education, that we can see that short-term impact as well as long-term impact that it has, not only on individual people's life, but actually on the region as well as internationally, because Afghanistan could potentially become a breeding ground for terrorists. One of the main reasons is that lack of education in there. So I'm going to conclude there, and thank you so much for having me and listening to me.
May, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your journey. I have a small confession to make to you that if you'd been here 24 months ago, I would probably not have heard of the Hazaris. But at the University of Southampton, we're privileged to work with the Council for Academics at Risk, and we are currently hosting some Hazari women at the University of Southampton. So, and I'm sure your talk is going to inspire many people and lots of questions. You've already started to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Chelvan. He is Head of Immigration and Public Law at 33 Bedford Road, Chambers, got the address, and visiting adjunct professor at Southampton Law School. He is actually also an alum from our politics department, and this evening I discovered that Professor David Owen taught him everything he knows. So there we are. Or at least taught him his hobs. And today he specialises in the claims of lesbian, gay, trans or intersexual LGBTI asylum seekers fleeing homophobic or transphobic persecution. And this evening he'll be speaking to us on the legal issues facing refugees and asylum seekers, his experiences and successes, and why he's chosen to specialise in this area of law. So, Chelvan, please.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Yeah, you can see that I don't actually want to stand behind the lectern because I don't believe in barriers. And for this evening's presentation, it's quite good because I actually don't really like enforced borders. So that may be a quite interesting way of introducing my segment of today. So I'm going to talk about lost homes and new horizons as an activist lawyer's perspective. And it really does feel like coming home back here to Southampton tonight. I can't believe it. It's going to be 25 years since I graduated on July the 13th this year. I know what you're going to say. Great moisturizer. But I'm actually coming back next year to teach on the LLM International and Human Rights Law Program, on the International Law and Globalization and the International Refugee Law Program. And the one thing which I always tell the Southampton students is that, I'm here living my dream. The work I do has both a national and global impact. And to be able to share that, and I'm seeing friends in the audience today, to be able to share that with students gives me a huge buzz. Because if I can live my dream, I feel that every Southampton student has the capacity and ability to do so as well. World Refugee Day, amazing. That's the poster by the UNHCR saying, let's create a world where refugees are always included. And when we look at international human rights law, we're not just looking at the Refugee Convention. Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives a fundamental right to every human being to be able to claim asylum in their countries of choice. It is not illegal to claim asylum. Now, the pathway I'm going to provide in this very short segment today includes a bit of a summary of my role as an activist lawyer, the law bit, the 1951 Refugee Convention, the seminal case in the UK called H.J. Iran and H.D. Cameroon. I was junior counsel to H.D. Cameroon in the Court of Appeal. And then looking at the situation of the 2022 and 2023 legislative changes. Owning up here, I know Suella Braverman. We were in Chambers together 2011 to 2015. I also know Lord Murray, the Home Office Minister in the House of Lords, because we did intervarsity debating competitions together. I was here at Southampton when Connor Burns was here. So you get to a certain age in life where you know these people and know how they tick. And Keir Starmer was in Chambers with me when I was a pupil at Doughty Street. So it's quite ironic to work in this field, knowing some of the personalities personally, but looking at what's happening here. Headline here, don't trust politicians. And then what we look at, positive thoughts in relation to assisting migrant clients. So my role, my journey as an activist lawyer, with my wig and gown. Well, I wasn't born in the UK. That's me, my passport photo, my Sri Lankan passport, and on the opposite side, that's me as a 4-year-old, 6th of September 1978, the bottom of that second page, was the date stamp of when I entered the United Kingdom to accompany my father and my brother to join my mother. Why was I here? In 1977 and 1978, there were anti-Tamil riots in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. So my mother was already here as an anaesthetist doing her postgrad qualifications because she just expected to get her qualifications in Portsmouth and go back to Sri Lanka as a consultant. And they decided it wasn't safe to bring up 2 young boys in Sri Lanka. So that's why we piggybacked her visa to come to the UK to be safe. And that was very fortuitous of our parents because 40 years ago this summer was the genocide, the pogrom against Tamils in Sri Lanka, in July 1983. So we didn't know about refugee status, but we kept safe by coming to the UK through my mother's immigration status. So I'm a quasi-refugee in all but name, but I'm very, very proud of being an immigrant. That's my brother and I with my father and mother just after we arrived in Portsmouth. So I'm proud to be an immigrant because my calling, and I say that to anybody who's going through the job interviews, what is your USP? What's your unique selling point? And for me, it's to be the mouthpiece for those who know the words but have no voice, to be an advocate. And what did I learn in Southampton, and I'll give you a personal story, is that week before my first year exams in 1996, 31st of May 1996, I came out to my family and they kicked me out of home. And it was because of my chosen family here in Southampton that I had the support and the care to be able to say, and Professor Caroline Thomas, who's no longer with us, kept on saying, you've got so much more to give. Southampton lit that fire in the belly to be to learn the skills and refine the skills of advocacy, academic rigor, and activism. Now, I was a bit of a student politician. I caused a few problems to University Senate and Council. You know, when they banned when the armed forces had a policy banning openly lesbian and gay people serving the armed forces, some of the students tried to ban the armed forces from the career fair. What did I do as somebody who came to the university as a civil engineering student? I thought, wait a minute here, the engineering faculty get a lot of money from the armed forces. We have an equality and non-discrimination policy at the university which says that we can't discriminate against lesbian and gay people. So as a student member of University Senate, Court and Council, I took the matter up with University Senate and saying, the money the engineering faculty get from the armed forces is contrary to the equal opportunities policy. And it went to University Senate and Council, and John Lowrise, the Secretary and Registrar of University Senate, said, but the discrimination is legal. And that's what really fired me up, is that if the discrimination is legal, we needed to change the law. It was amazing that the university kept on sponsoring me for the Kennedy Scholarship and everything else. I was a troublemaker. But the point is that the way my practice was is a symbiotic relationship between litigation, academic research, and policy work. And the way I'm able to transform that is by having a national and global impact. So that's me on various television shows, which I go on to talk about refugees, doing the I'm an Immigrant poster campaign in 2015, and that's with my husband Mark when I got Legal Aid Barrister of the Year in 2014. Because my main asset is knowledge is power. Sir Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes blamed David Owen over there for that, the locking in the forest. So it's all about soft power. It's how we use our knowledge through education to empower ourselves, but more importantly, in my role, empower others. So let's look at the law, the 1951 Refugee Convention, being World Refugee Day. So we've got the earlier instrument of the International Convention on Refugees by Belgium, Bulgaria, Norway, Egypt, and France. This is after the First World War, legal nations saying, Article 4, the personal status of refugees shall be governed by the law of their country of domicile, or failing such, the law of the country of residence. So we shift from protection within your home country to protection by the international community. For we know that in the labour and concentrated camps, and this is where my field drives in, because of course I knew I was different as a person of colour in growing up in Worthing, where my brother and I were the only non-white students, but we were safe because my mother was a school doctor, and if you said anything bad against Chelvan and Suresh, she had that BCG gun. But my difference also came out at 14 when I realized I was attracted to people of the same sex. Actually, the same time as Section 28 came into power in the spring of 1989. But in the same labor and concentration camps that you had the Jews, you also had gay men stitched with a pink triangle, lesbians with a black triangle, bisexuals with their purple triangle, because this is their badge of difference, stigma, shame, and harm. So what happened was, after the Second World War, not only did we have that narrative, but we had mass migrations across Europe. And the world said, we've got to do something about this. So therefore, in meetings in San Francisco and Geneva, the nations of the world, including the United Kingdom, came up with the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees, supplemented by the 1967 Protocol. So who is a refugee? The law bit here, Article 1A2, definition of a refugee. Owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, 5 grounds: race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Okay, so the 5 basis convention reason grounds, and then they're outside their country nationality, so they can't claim asylum to the UK from Sudan, contrary to what the Home Secretary was saying at the time of the Sudan crisis. They're out of their country of nationality or habitual residence, because of course statelessness, the UNRWA Palestinian refugees, and is unable, or owing to their fear, unwilling to avail themselves of protection of that country. So that means your state will kill you, murder you, rape you, or your neighbours will try and suffer harm, and your state will not protect you. That's why we call it international surrogate protection. The UK goes into the shoes of your country of origin because your country of origin will not protect you, or more importantly, in a lot of cases, will harm you. So what is refugees? Is from UNHCR. Refugees are people who have been forced to flee their homes and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. 110 million people today are currently forcibly displaced. That's 1 in 78 of the world's population. Startling. A horrific figure. So as I said, the 5 convention reasons: race, religion, nationality, particular social group, and political opinion. Actual or imputed is about the focus of the fact that you don't need to be a political activist. In the case of Zimbabwe under Mugabe, if you weren't able to sing the ZANU-PF song, you were imputed. You were perceived to be anti-Mugabe, so you will suffer persecution. You look at the views of the potential persecutor because it's through their eyes they identify you as different. And through their identification of difference, do they target you for persecution. The fact that it's about non-conformity. You know, a lot of my clients is because they're not able to prove straight. You know, they live their lives having to be forced into opposite-sex marriages and have children to be able to prove that they're straight. If they slip up, they're identified and raped, murdered, detained, tortured, killed. And the core issue, that's a lot of with my academic work, is the concept of difference. Because if you're not different, well, because you're different, should I say, that's how you're identified by the potential persecutor. So that is the narrative. Now, so that's why imputed, a lot of focus of my work is in relation to the non-conformity principle, in relation to the fact it's not about who you are, it's about how your potential persecutor views you due to your inability to conform to what is a stereotype they expect you to live by. That is the key issue with refugee status. So the key components is serious harm and failure of state protection. That's the Hathaway definition of persecution. The physical journey is that you have to be outside the country of your nationality. But note, contrary to what our politicians say and the mainstream media, the majority of refugees do not come to the UK. It was a lie to say in the Parliament that there are over 1 million people trying to come to the UK. There's no evidential basis to that at all. The majority of forcibly displaced people go to their neighbouring countries. So a lot in the Saharan states in Africa. And I said the 5 convention reasons. So the framework guidance in HA ran in 2010. Now, when I went to Southampton, was very gratefully awarded a Kennedy Memorial Trust scholarship, went to Harvard, learned about queer activism and came back to the UK in 2001. And because I met my husband Mark in Heaven, the nightclub, I stayed here in the UK. But at that time, LGBT refugee law was all about sex. It's all about whether you could have sex discreetly in your bedroom or the bathhouse, and if you weren't caught, then you could go back. Lord Panic, counsel for Gina Miller in the Gina Miller case, earlier before he got his silk, in a case called Bombesi in 1989, said, well, homosexuals can refrain from sexual acts. This was in 1989 at the height of the Section 28. So because they can refrain from sex, they cannot be protected on the Refugee Convention. That was the law of this country in 1989. Yeah? So what happened was then the Labour government came in, of course, in 1997, and this is why I am not a proponent of Labour or the Tory government and will never get a knighthood, is that the Labour government came in 2004 and imposed what is called the discretion test. And what they said is that, Bipinda, if I point a gun towards you, would you run towards a gun or away from a gun? Away. So Bipinda's a scaredy cat, yeah? But he's like the majority of people, of course he'll run away. So what they said is, yes, we believe that you're a gay man, a bisexual man, a lesbian woman, a bisexual woman from Eritrea. We accept that in those countries, you'll have a well-founded fear of persecution. But because you'll run away from the gun, that you'll be voluntarily discreet, then unless you can say that that discretion is not reasonably tolerable, you can be sent back. And that's what the Labour government did between 2004 and 2010. 98 to 99% of LGBT asylum claims, you accept your sexual identity, you'll be reasonably discreet. Labour government. Yeah, Michael Cashman has a horrible time when I keep on reminding him about how anti-queer rights the Labour government really were. So what happened is that the case then went to the Supreme Court in 2010, and Lord Roger, one of our former Supreme Court justices, said, look, so straight people aren't expected to be reasonably tolerably discreet. They could have mild flirtations in the bar and not be hauled out and killed. So what Lord Roger said is to illustrate the point with trivial stereotypes, examples from British society. Just as male heterosexuals are free to enjoy playing rugby, drinking beer and talking about girls with their mates, so male homosexuals are free to enjoy themselves going to Kylie concerts, drinking exotically coloured cocktails and talking about boys with their straight female mates. So hence why it's called the Kylie concert case. Now, the joke was that before it was Kylie, it was Barbara Streisand, and after Barbara Streisand, it was Kylie Minogue. And Kylie. Now, it's not that we're going to test every gay applicant and say, do you like Kylie? Of course they do. Padam. I mean, seriously. I mean, heartbeat there. But the point is that we're all able to live freely and openly in the manifestations of our identities we choose to. The issue here for refugee status is that you have a right to live openly and freely without that fear of persecution. Now, ironically, in Cameroon, a couple of months after the judgment, 2 gay men were actually attacked because they ordered Baileys at the bar, a drink, because it wasn't conformative, and wore tight T-shirts. A couple of months after this judgment. So what did the Home Office do, of course? Well, the Home Office, of course, said, well, look, we accepted you were lesbian, gay, bisexual, but now we don't believe you, prove it. But we'll go to that in a moment. So the 4-limb test of 8J run is, first of all, is the applicant gay or are they perceived to be gay? Secondly, do openly gay people have a well-founded fear of persecution? I'm looking at my cue cards, I'm slightly worried about that. So the point is, in Nigeria, there's a population of 80 million people. Okay, let's say it's 5% of the population are LGBT. Okay, so that's about 4 million. Where are the 4 million out gay people in Nigeria? They don't exist. Why? It's because they're discreet. Because they know that if they're open and identified, they will suffer persecution. And then the third limb is that will the individual be open on return, if they are they're a refugee, or if they're discreet only because of a personal social reason, they will suffer persecution. I'm allowed 20 minutes, I'm sorry. Yes, okay, so can we take that to Kiva? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so the notion from that is that prior to that, the Home Office said, look, we accept you're lesbian, gay, or bisexual. Now they said, prove that you're gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So sexual identity cases, and I said 1951 Refugee Convention, it was only in 1999 that the the UK courts actually accepted that women had a freestanding right to refugee protection in a case called Shah and Islam. And in the obiter breadcrumbs of the judgment from the House of Lords, they thought, well, male homosexuals may also be able to show they're a particular social group because of their innate or mutable characteristics. So in 1999, Lord Justice Shyman, in a case called Jane, constructed the continuum with saying, if you have a state such as Iran, Tahir in Iran, caught in bed with his same-sex boyfriend by the religious Basiji police and taken down and detained, well, he's clearly going to be killed. And then at the other side of the spectrum, you have Lisa in London, who lives openly and freely, got engaged to her girlfriend, is adopting children, and has employment protection. So that continuum is by the way the which the courts will decide whether you're a refugee. So straight man volunteering. I'm not going to look at the Vice-Chancellor. Yes. When did you first realise you were straight? There's always got to be one clever person, isn't it? Usually it's like scratching the head, don't know, you've been conditioned. The majority of straight men don't realise when they first realise they were straight. Yeah, there's no on-off switch suddenly realising they were straight. So what a silly question to ask an LGBT person in relation to whether they realise they're straight. So what I did is, after the H.A. Iran case, I constructed a model called the DISH model, difference, stigma, shame, and harm, which looks at a linear narrative of trigger questions. When did you first realise you were different? Remember, that question and notion of difference goes to the core concepts under the Refugee Convention. Then when did you realise stigma? By social community, by your community, religious surrounding society. Shame, internalized shame because of the impact of that stigma. And then harm is the damage you will receive. And this has been endorsed by the UNHCR in 2012. Various governments, including the Home Office, did not copyright it or trademark it. But it is a model now used globally to be able to empower queer refugees with their narratives. Different types of persecution, noted in the time. The PowerPoint slides will be freely available after this. So this is the work I do, look about conversion therapy. And that's why I love this area of law. I call it sexy law. There's so many different areas. And 2022 and 2023 changes, and I'm sure we'll talk about more of that in the question and answer section. But we talk about stop the boats is not stopping the roads. They're lying to you. Stopping the boats is about stopping refugees. Because we don't have a visa to enable individuals to come to the UK to claim asylum. They're lying to you. Yeah? The settlement schemes which are here, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and Hong Kong, are for a minutiae of the refugees. They want us to stop allowing refugees coming to this country. That's the message. Yeah? So what do we have to do? We have to use education to power. I'm just going to this last slide because my time is up in relation to this, and I'm going to show why I celebrate the work I do. I love, whatever I may say negative, I love this area of law because what I love is the thank you card saying thank you for saving my life. But these are four powerful queer black women who I have in my life, and on the top left is Morgoba, who is part of Micro Rainbow UK Black Pride, who's a lesbian from Zimbabwe who got refugee status. But on the other women, Shu Kalater on the top right, Adronke Parta in the bottom right, and PJ Samuels are all former refugee clients of mine. And they are living their life to the full, using their lived experience to empower and protect others. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelvan. Truly inspiring. So now we're turning to another inspiring speaker, who is Hewan Omer. Hewan, are you with us online? Just checking that we can get through. Hewan is the country director of the Free Yazidi Foundation, and she's currently in her office in northern Iraq. We hope that she's there and we hope that she's safe.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm used by the minute you call my name, my electricity just gone. So I have internet, but I'm gonna be waiting until I open my camera.
Perfect. So I'll introduce you while you sort your camera out. Hewan is one of the thousands of Yazidis who fled ISIS in 2014 and has been enduring the struggles and discrimination that followed. After graduating with an English degree from the University of Duhok in 2016, she worked as a translator and an interpreter, and then as an English language instructor, a secretary, and a women's rights advocate. After experiencing religious and gender-based discrimination in previous jobs, Hewan came to Free Yazidi Foundation with a strong dedication to fight for the rights of Yazidis, especially women, and uplifting their voices. So Hewan, the floor is yours. Over to you, and hopefully we'll be able to see you on the screen.
Okay, good evening. I am so glad to be here today, and thank you very much to the Southampton University for having me today here from Yazidi community, and to share the experiences of my community in Iraq. My name is Hewan Omer. I'm a Yazidi from Iraq. Maybe most of you, those who are in the hall or who are joining online, haven't heard about Yazidis and the continued genocide and discrimination and persecution that they have faced throughout history. I will be talking briefly and give an overview on the last genocide that happened, because that's where the time I saw myself the genocide and lived the genocide and being displaced since almost in almost a month. It's going to be 9 years since the genocide. In 2014, the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, committed a genocide against the Yazidi community in Sinjar in Iraq, and that genocide resulted in mass killings and forced conversions, enslavement of over 6,000 Yazidi women and children, and displacement of over 400,000 Yazidis, with destruction of the homeland and destruction of the religious shrines. And when we look at the goal of ISIS was, because we see it was systematically, something was planned. It was not just overnight. When you look at what happened in 2014, the goal was to ethnically cleanse in the Iraq from all Yazidis. And until now, we have almost most of Yazidis are still living in displacement camps in their own country, like hours far from their own homes. 9 years after the genocide, the Yazidi community still, I always say, it's still like an emergency. You are feeling still in the emergency situation, because you are in your own country for 9 years now. And according to the size of the crimes that were committed, and we look at the ground and the reality and what has been done to recover people from the genocide, to heal them. The Yazidi community continues to suffer, to suffer in Iraq, and the discrimination that's ongoing, that's there, and the fear that you as a Yazidi have in Iraq, that this is not the last genocide. We have throughout history, we say Yazidis have faced 74 genocides. We only know we hear the numbers because it was never a time that was documented, because there was no us who can share our own stories to you like today. Like, I have the power of education and the language that I can share it myself to you and tell you what really happened. So it was something that was repressed It continued 74 times, and the last one in the 21st century, killing, executing, and people for no reason, just because of who they are. Today, we still have nearly more than 200,000 Yazidis are still in displacement camps in Iraq, as I mentioned, just hours from their own homes in Sinjar. So the hard thing for us when you look at it, it's not you are a refugee and leaving the country. You are in your own country for a decade without any plans, any solution. What's going to be the future of these people, the future of education for these children? You're just being in a fence, surrounded, without us knowing what's next, what's going to happen to us. It's not just being in under a tent, but you look more at the whole generation's future. When you talk about this children's future of education, of job opportunities, and in general, how that's going to look like. I myself, I'm a displaced person from Sinjar too in 2014. Living in northern Iraq in Kurdistan region since the genocide. I'm a graduate of English language and literature, as Jane stated at the beginning. During the genocide, I was in my first year of college, and I can still remembering those days, difficult times, not understanding what's going on, why this is happening to you, as being in an age of not knowing what does the word displacement mean, genocide mean, with hard and difficulties. I was able to continue my education and started working with the humanitarian organization since 2016, and currently I am the country director of one of the leading Yazidi civil society organization. The Free Yazidi Foundation was one of the organization, was shortly established as a response of the 2014 genocide to support the community and advocate for the rights of the Yazidi community after what happened, and shed the lights on and put the topic on the table internationally and globally. I always say, and we believe, like, it was through the education, or having some Yazidis who were around the world who could have the language like now, who could share, and really this is what happened. Because as I mentioned, it happened throughout history 74 times. No, we still living in our own countries, they don't know who Yazidis are. So if you are this amount of time, genocides happening to you, this amount of killings and mass executions, and you still see the topics not there, and no one really knows who you are, that's hard, and it keeps on going and continues. It was through the power, or the education, or the Yazidis also who were around, who could really send a message and keep talking about and the genocide, and really this is what happened to the Yazidis in Iraq, and this is not the first time, and the fear, as I'm mentioning, it's not the last time, because when you look at the ground, the ongoing discrimination, the ongoing non-acceptance of who you are, and from all levels that are there, whether you continuing your education, whether for job opportunities, for seeking for your rights, and publicly speaking, defending yourself. it's so important we do not forget and leave people who are in need behind. Today, like marking the World Refugee Day, Annie, we know that over the world there are hundreds and thousands of people every year are fleeing their homes because of persecutions or whatever reasons that makes people to flee. So we want people to, and the countries and who are on seeking and how to protect and give chances to the refugees, that really these people are not just wanting to leave the country just to have fun. There are reasons behind. People wants to live in peace as a human being, to not be questions of who you are, what's your religion, who do you believe in. You will be killed based on that. You want to flee of your life. Like now we see, especially, not sure if some of you heard of the recent hate speech that was spiked like in Iraq against the Yazidi community, even after the genocide, and we see thousands of mullahs came out and again just the same ideology as ISIS in 2014, and the seeing Yazidis are devil worshippers. So this created again for Yazidi community to leave and flee the country while knowing there's no a way that's legal. You either gonna die, you know that you're gonna maybe not make it throughout the way, or you just wanna have a different life, or you just on the way you're gonna not reach anywhere because you know this is a way that's gonna be difficult. You might not reach to a place that you want. So it's really important we see in the Refugee Day for the refugee to access and give them the educations that they need so they can better to fight for their rights and continue advocating and uplifting their voices. And it's really important for the countries, if you cannot make a place of origin for people to stay in it, to make it accessible and doors to be open for people who wants to flee or who wants to seek a refugee and seek for peace in a different country. It's really important that always we understand these are people who wants and seeking for a better life, who wants to use their skills and get the power and education and the development. But if you are in your country that you are not protected, you are not seen as a human being, you are being killed because of who you are, while just I look at you, you look at me as a human being, but because you tell me you don't have a religious book, you are a devil worshipper, you are calling me these names. It's really difficult. So this is the case really for the Yazidi community in Iraq, and that's something, it's a continued genocide. We always say it's been in a month, we're gonna enter the 10 years since the genocide, and almost all Yazidis are, most of them living in displacement camps and seeking for the very basic life needs. Still imagine you are 10 years in your own country. If you are now coming and visiting an IDP camp, you say, what are the needs? The fear is that if I can feed my children, or if my tent's gonna be burned, if you can renew that two meter of nylon for me. While we're supposed to be in a situation now seeking for and demanding and advocating for this genocide that committed to not be forgotten, to not be just like a page to be closed and that just to go on as if nothing happened. But because nothing was at that amount of the genocide was provided, so I'm still in the very first year of the genocide, wanting and asking for the very basic things. because those were not provided in the state that I'm living in. And I'm not reaching to the level that now I want justice. I want those people who committed the crimes to be held accountable. While we know that those who committed and who participated live with impunity in Iraq, as if live freely, nothing happened. So I'm just giving the experiences of the Yazidi community just to make sure for people who haven't heard about who Yazidis are, what's the Yazidi community, and how many genocide they have faced throughout history, and what are the struggles still there. So we all know and believe that through the education and supporting and investing in the education of youth and empowering them, that's where they can keep fighting without stop and advocating for their rights and defending for a better life. I don't know if still I have time.
Thank you, Hewan. That is, we're privileged to hear your testimony. I think a silence has descended over the hall here because we are all so moved from hearing from you firsthand, and thank you so much for joining us. I know that there is a time difference between the UK and Iraq, and I know that you're in your office. If you're able to stay with us for the question and answer, we'll be very privileged to have you stay with us, but we will also understand if you need to go. So thank you so much. I think it's really important just to be reminded that there can be refugees just living 1 or 2 hours away from their place of origin rather than their country of origin. So we've had 3 absolutely fantastic speakers this evening giving us very different perspectives on this World Refugee Day. And so we're now turning to the question and answer session of this evening. And Boo, we have some questions already coming through.
Some on the screen.
So some on the screen, okay. So I will read those in my best voice. Oh, they've gone already. We are exploring the engagement of refugees via creative arts storytelling activities in a hosting country. These activities to be supported by the charity sector and bodies. The aim is to help refugees share narratives that enable them to better articulate claims to justice and make claims known and more accessible to wider audiences of active citizens in hosting countries. On the basis of your broader experience, do you see such activities as a good means to promote claims to justice, equality and solidarity that are prominent among the refugee committee in the UK? So I think I'll turn to May first for her reflections on that. I'm going to come and join you.
Yes.
I dropped a wardrobe on my foot on Saturday. I have to apologise for my trainers.
Thought it was a fashion statement.
That's a very fascinating questions, and really, I think it's a very interesting thing to be doing to promote understanding among refugees. And one thing that we unfortunately see in Britain is that lack of public knowledge about refugees, because of the sort of negative image that we always see in the media and social media about refugees coming, taking over our jobs, or they're illegal immigrants, and we're not really giving them an image of human beings. So by doing activities like this, not only are you, especially if you're able to really integrate and engage the wider community, not just the refugee community, but the wider community, to engage in this sort of activities, you're creating this understanding and promoting public education about the refugees itself. But most importantly, I think it was interesting in there is about the claims to justice. A lot of refugees that come to these countries don't know the legal system, and I'm sure you'll be able to tell us more. So by having these creative activities, they'll be able to understand the legal system that exists in their host countries to be able to then have a claim, and hopefully their claims not being rejected.
Well, there's a current position, and then there's a future position pending whether the illegal migration bill becomes law. Because clearly, if the illegal migration bill becomes law, then they won't be in our communities anyway, because they'll be detained in these wonderful prison camps, I'm going to call them, off our shores and sent to Rwanda or other countries. So that's going to have an impact. But in relation to the sentiment, in relation to building cultural dialogues, it's like with any community. It's about the fact that, you know, it's quite funny, the profile of refugees. You know, I remember when, under Labour, it was, you know, Kosovan refugees ate our swans. Yeah, so we've always had the negative stories regarding refugees in our mainstream media. The one event which changed it was Afghanistan. You know, the politicians weren't prepared for it. When the Taliban came into, you know, Kabul and took over, you know, hence why Dominic Raab kept on the holiday, because he didn't expect the British public to actually go up in arms and say, we must help, we must assist. Because British public opinion has always been a tolerant and accepting nation of people who come and flee persecution. The Huguenots, the Ugandans, it's all about acceptance. Yeah? So the point is to be able to have those engagement with refugees, but we can't just have the engagement of those refugees in our metropolitan areas. It's got to be in Brexit voting Basildon or the northeast or the northwest, and they think, oh, I got on with them. I had a good time. They seem decent blokes, or you know, ladies or whatever. Because that's where we've really got to not change hearts and minds, but educate and inform. Yeah. So you know, I see a lot of these programs happening in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham. Not good enough. You know, I think the sentiment is good, but if you really want to make change, go to those areas where there's a lot of hate and ignorance for refugees. Jane, can I just correct something about the last speaker? You're not a refugee if you're still in your country of nationality or habitual residence. You have to be that you're internally displaced. But, sorry, being a typical lawyer, I want to get that on the record. But, you know, amazing sentiments. But 12 months' time, if the Tories are still in power, this is an academic conversation. Because they won't be in our communities. That's a reality. I mean, I did say when I was having a chat with somebody about this earlier, the biggest thing anybody in this room can do is vote. It's not about lobby your politicians, it's vote. And what is dangerous in our country at the moment is majorities of Labour or Conservatives. You know, this is my political stance. My husband forbids me from ever going into politics because I'll get too angry at my best friend Norm. But we need a coalition. We need a check and balance, because otherwise, you know, Labour is just as bad as the Tories with their record on refugees and migrants. Yeah, we need proportional representation. I'm never going to stand for politics, don't worry. You know, I prefer going before a judge and arguing my case. But, you know, asylum, refugees, I never say asylum seekers, you put the person before the refugee, you know, they're human beings, is that, you know, they are the easiest communities to target with the lies. You know, these right-wing social media hacks who go on TikTok and go to the hostels and film Iranian refugees and Eritrean refugees and to give their story. Do they actually know that they're actually assisting those individuals to get asylum? Because in the UK, if Iran or Eritrea know that you've claimed asylum and they'll identify you, you are a refugee. Yeah? Why is the BBC journalist going on and interviewing these refugee claims when we know that 76 to 78% of those individuals who come to the UK are genuine refugees or have some sort of humanitarian or human rights protection? So the facts are the majority of people who come to the UK are either granted asylum or some sort of status by the Home Office or through our independent courts and tribunals are genuine refugees. That's the facts. Albanians, 52% of Albanians coming to this country are granted refugee status. We've got domestic violence, trafficked women, trafficked men, blood feuds. Albania is not a safe country. These are the facts. They don't want you to know the facts. The reason why the majority of people who come to the country are sorry, I'm going on a tangent now. Okay. The reason why the majority of young men is that the young men take the risk to be able to come here, get the status, and then bring their families. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that there aren't women and children. Yeah, so we've got to crash the myths and use your vote.
Okay. I feel like a bit like Fiona Bruce now. Question time. So I'm going to look and take a question from the floor. If anyone dares. Yes, please. We've got one here in the... and one there. Okay. The lady 3 rows back actually had her hand up first, so I'm going to put my ED&I hat on. Thank you.
Thank you. Homira, my question is exactly from you. You leave your home, but your home does not leave you. It is the truth. How long did it take? Of course, you were a child when you came to the UK. How long did it take for you to overcome this hollow inside that you do not belong to any land? How long did it take for you?
I think you can never overcome that. For me, it got better because I was able to visit Afghanistan, again, and I did every 3-4 years. But that feeling, that hole got so much bigger after the Taliban takeover. I mean, right now I can't ever go back to Afghanistan as long as the Taliban are in power. One, because of my ethnicity, religious affiliation, and also because I speak out against Taliban very publicly. And so that feeling, I think you never lose that feeling to your home country, especially if you're born there. But one very interesting card that I saw earlier said home is a feeling, right? You feel connection to your host country. Well, I think you no longer can call your host country if you're British, but you still have connection to back home, whether it's wherever you were born or whether that's where your family was born. And there's a really interesting philosophical theory at SEL is called the return of repressed. And even if you are 3-4 generations in a specific country, genetically you're still linked to that, and due to that genetic linkage, you still feel connection to that country. Even, you 3-4 generation you haven't been there. And so as human beings, I think we are in a way programmed to always feel connection to that. And especially if you're born in that country, the feeling is so strong. But what's important is to have that feeling to say, this is my home now, I have to make this my own home, and to create that feeling in that country that this is home, but not necessarily really lose that feeling, I think, ever, I think, yeah.
Hewan, do you want to add anything on that question? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I think it's really important whether what's happening to a certain communities, a genocide, a persecution, whether it's through art, through telling story, it can be through a poem, it can be through films, all kind of activities that could keep and talk about what really happened, and that to be a tool to be used as a documenting it, and also as a way to show and for you also to keep fighting for for your right and for justice to be served. So it's really such activities through. It's really important, and it has its effect there.
So, Boo, can you give us another question from online? I don't think we put them up. We're just we don't want to lose connection with
Dr.
Hewan.
Jacqueline Landman has sent in a question to say her parents could work to make a contribution right away when the family came into exile in 1964. How can we advocate and lobby to allow refugees to work?
Okay, there are two instances. Once you've got refugee status, you've got permission to work. But once you come to the UK, and this is where the Home Office's system is completely broken down, is that if your decision takes more than 12 months to be taken by the Home Office, you're allowed permission to work under what I call the shortage occupation list. Otherwise, and then if you get a negative decision, then you're no longer allowed to work. And the reason for that is that Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights is about establishing a private and family life. And what happens is if you go to work, you meet people and you become friends and you become part of the community, and they don't like that. Yeah? Or you meet somebody you fall in love with and you have a relationship with them and you fall in love and you marry, or you have a partner, and then suddenly you've got a right to be here. Don't like that. Yeah? But I have clients of mine who've waited 3 years between claiming asylum and getting an interview regarding their asylum claim. The system's broken, and it's not because of refugees. The 16 billion, the 5 billion or whatever a day, it's not because of refugees, it's because the Home Office haven't been making decisions. For example, today, I've been given permission by my client to do this. A client of mine, a Nigerian gay guy, accepted he's gay, accepted that openly gay people have a well-founded fear of persecution in Nigeria. His evidence is that he will be discreet because of fear of persecution. Home Office decision 2 days ago was, and I said, Andronke Pato, lesbian activist, granted refugee. Oh, you haven't shown that you'd be individually targeted. I mean, that's how nonsense the Home Office decision. And these are our clients who have sleepless nights and days, can't do anything, and they're being stigmatized. And, I go and do interviews on BBC News and Talk TV and stuff like that, and they say, well, it's all these, refugees. And I have to say, it's not the refugees. It's the Home Office. The system's broken. The reason why it's costing the taxpayers so much money is because they are not making the decisions. 146,000, 170,000 backlog cases for refugees. So going back to the question is that, they don't want refugees to work, or those coming to here claim asylum before the decision, and you can only get permission to work a year after. They've opened up the shortage occupation list, but what would be better is if they actually made the decisions on their asylum claims and provided them certainty and safety.
I think we'll have another question from the floor here.
Can I just say about the Hazaras, that the UK courts have recognised Hazaras as refugees for many, many years. Yeah, even before the Taliban takeover. So,
and Yazidis?
Yazidis, I only did one Yazidi case many, many years ago in Newcastle, but the refugee status as well, because it's a religious minority. So it's very important to know that our fellow panelists, that refugee status.
I don't want this to be a back and forth, but UNHCR, for example, with the ACRS, that's
It just come out, yeah.
Yeah. One of the pathways for UK to get people is through the UNHCR, which they don't recognize religious or ethnic minorities, which means that people are forced to use the illegal routes to come to the UK.
Absolutely.
Because there are, even with the ARAP, the pathways, a lot of people don't. The criteria is so strict that it's only certain group of or certain individuals can qualify to be part of this ARAP. So people who are genuinely at risk are not qualified to come through the legal route. So they're forced to come through the
and even if they're genuinely at risk, and this is another issue, lack of legal access. Lack of access to lawyers. Our legal aid system is decimated. There are legal aid deserts around this country, and the number of legal aid providers for asylum and immigrants are dwindling because the government has made it so difficult. Yes.
Okay, so we have a gentleman.
Good evening. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their inspiring talks. I have a question, if you don't mind, I read it out because it's kind of long. So, given that the support and attention a given refugee group receives from the world governments depends strongly on the politics, commercial and other power interests, how much freedom do higher education institutions, and particularly in the UK, have in building their own refugee education support networks and programs? To what extent such programs need to be coordinated with the Foreign Office and be endorsed officially or unofficially with the government, by the government? It's probably a question.
I mean, we know there are University of Sanctuaries, and there are people like David who will know more than I do in relation to formless networks and scholarship. I mean, from my experience, what I've seen, which is quite interesting, is scholarships for those who are refugees here in the UK or going through the process, which David's nodding his head. I'm glad I'm still on the message on that. So that's one way of looking at individual cases. But you know what our Home Secretary has said about international students in any event. You know, I think universities have a very, very important part to play to provide that sanctuary and safe space for refugees and migrant communities. And it's about forming that network and reaching out in certain cases. But there's always winners and losers. You know, and with Afghanistan in certain countries, there was a lot of focus energy on certain countries where, you know, we need to look at the fact that the UK has a long list of historical debts to a lot of countries around the world, and we shouldn't be starting to categorize. You know, that's why the principle the UK has always had is that if you come to our borders and claim asylum and you're a genuine refugee, we will grant you sanctuary. That's no longer the case.
David, did you want to come in on this? So Professor David Owen is the academic lead for our University of Sanctuary bid, which I think is going in any moment.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, that's right. Basically, we can support people who are making asylum claims, who've got refugee status or have some other humanitarian status. It has to be said that Jane has been doing more than that in other countries in the world, and the university has been doing work in terms of online education for women in Afghanistan, and also linking up to Ukraine. And so there are some things you can do now that we live in a more digital world. I mean, I remember many, many years ago when I was in a refugee camp in Gaza, we'd been in discussions with people in the Arab League about trying to build a kind of open university for Palestinian students, because basically the universities on the West Bank tended to get shut down 9 months of every year. So there are kind of possibilities and things to do. I mean, I think the thing I'd just want to add, you know, Chelvan, you said that, you know, if you reach the UK border, okay? And it's always been, if you reach the UK border, you know, the peremptory norm of non-refoulement kicks in. But of course, the last 40 years have been about preventing people ever getting to the border. That's not just the UK, that's Europe, that's the US, that's, you know, Australia famously, of course, with narrow islands. So the refugee crisis we have now is basically because there's less than 1% of need for resettlement. I mean, so of the refugee population, less than 1% get resettled. So if you're a refugee, you have 3 choices, right? You stay in a refugee camp where the average length is now about 20 years. okay? You can go into an urban setting where you're likely to be exploited and marginalized and at risk. Or you can make a dangerous journey to the global north, okay? So basically, we have created this crisis out of the failure to provide adequate resettlement for people in need. So the background to today's events is that last 40 years of, as it were, pushing down the possibilities for people to claim asylum places in the case. So that's just a footnote to the discussion.
To our questioner, I think that the questioner was saying, what freedom does the University of Southampton have, and whether we really truly do have the freedom. And I'm turning to the Vice-Chancellor, but may as well get it from the top.
So with your question, there was a good bit and there was a bad bit, because the last thing I want is the government interfering, because that often makes things more complicated. But so you said, should it be coordinated by the Foreign Office? My immediate answer is absolutely not. But there is something. So we as a university have a relatively high degree of freedom, because universities in this country are not state organisations, so we're not governed directly by politicians or government, but we obviously have to operate within the law. They can help us. For example, over Ukraine, there was actually funding to help us fund studentships to fund, so they can help us. That's the best way they can do, is give us what I call hypothecated funding to target those particular areas. So Ukraine was an obvious humanitarian direct response. But then largely it's up to us. And I think, the great thing about universities is they have people made up, we're a very broad church, very broad community. But as you've heard from David, a lot of academics really care about these sort of things. And so we have a lot of schemes. You've got the connections. We have their organisations in this country who, CARA is a good example of something. We're very supportive of that. We develop through philanthropic support abilities to support students from those countries. So the best thing is the government basically doesn't interfere too much. It gives a bit of funding, and particularly around immigration policy, it's understanding. And that means, I think then you've got the motivation within organisations like ours. We need to do our part to help support these people. And there's a lot of empathy with that approach. So some level of government support, but definitely don't coordinate it.
Thank you, Mark. I think that time is against us, actually. But yeah, I'm going to give May the last word as opposed to the Vice-Chancellor.
Oh, I'm so sorry. But I think it's important to note that I think what David said was really interesting, because, for example, in Indonesia, there's about 8,000 Hazaras who have been stuck there for, on average, 20 years. And the resettlement from there is, again, around 1%. And it's what's, I think, frustrating for when you talk to these people is that, the UNHCR, for example, telling them you have to wait. And even during when the Afghanistan fell, so well, either you can wait or you can go back. And you have, second-generation refugees there that are still stuck in there within the limbo situation. But one interesting case with a university in Australia, Monash University, is what they have is a law clinic. And they have postgraduate students and postdocs who sit and does sort of voluntarily work and help refugees with their cases. And I think that would be something that would be really interesting for UK universities to think about, where providing voluntary people who are interested to provide these legal services or legal advice for refugees, not just in the UK, but actually maybe in these third countries like Indonesia that may not necessarily have access to law. And this also gives opportunity for students to learn something and experience and Yeah, I think would be really fascinating.
I don't want to steal any of the news from the School of Law about what their plans are for a law clinic with their new adjunct professor, but just watch this space. But Hewan, do you want to give us any final words?
Yeah, and this day I would like also to tell people and the decision makers, people who are in positions in the protection of the human rights and for the rights of refugee and displaced. No matter how many years are passed, we should know that there are still needs, and for people to not be forgotten and left behind, whether seeking safety, whether seeking education, whether seeking a very basic life. So this is something specifically, I mean, I talk in general, and when it comes to the cause of the Yazidi community, it's been 10 years and it's shifting the support to countries which people we see around the world what's happening. But I would like to say it's not about if 10 years pass, that means everything is solved. You hear directly from people themselves, from displaced, from the refugee, and directly hear the stories from them, and you will see what are the needs and what has been done.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us tonight and telling your stories. I think it's been a fantastic evening, a fantastic event. We've had 3 really powerful speakers and really powerful presentations and a great discussion, and I just want to thank everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Young blood thinks there's always tomorrow. I miss your touch on nights when I'm hollow. I know you crossed the bridge that I can't follow. Since the love that you left